So I want you to think about a time, maybe it was you, or maybe a really close friend, where you fell for someone who was just entirely the wrong type.
Oh, yeah. We all know that scenario.
Right, like someone who completely breaks the mold of your usual dating history. Maybe they're, I don't know, the polar opposite of what you usually look for, or they're just completely wrong for you on paper.
Absolutely. The
Plus,
classic bad decision.
exactly. But, okay, perhaps, and this is where it gets really compelling for today's deep dive, maybe it was someone of a gender that you weren't typically attracted to at all.
Right, which happens way more often than people think.
It really does. We've all seen this happen or experienced that sudden, just inexplicable pull towards someone who shatters all our established rules of attraction. And today we are focusing on a single, highly concentrated source that examines exactly why this happens. We're looking at Chapter 7, Love, Desire, and Sexual Fluidity by the researcher Lisa M. Diamond.
It is such a fascinating chapter.
It really is. So, our core mission today is to completely deconstruct this deeply ingrained assumption we have that romantic love and sexual desire are the exact same thing. And we're going to explore the surprising, scientifically backed reality of human sexual fluidity.
And, that experience of falling for the quote-unquote wrong person, especially when it crosses those established boundaries of gender or long-standing patterns of attraction, society usually triggers a very specific reaction to that.
Oh, totally. Like panic.
Yeah, exactly, panic. If you suddenly fall for someone outside your typical orientation, society tends to treat it as a massive crisis of identity.
Like you've been lying to yourself your whole life or something.
Right, friends and family might assume you've been repressing your true self or that your previous relationships were somehow a lie. But science approaches this from an entirely different vantage point. Instead of viewing these shifts as a breakdown of identity, researchers like Diamond view them as a fundamental feature of human adaptability.
Which is wild. It's a biological and evolutionary mechanism rather than a psychological crisis.
Exactly. It's not a glitch, it's a feature.
I love that. And that completely reframes the way we think about our own minds, right? If we aren't experiencing an identity crisis, but rather this, biological adaptation, that changes the stakes entirely. So, what does the landscape of our deep dive look like today? Where does the science actually live?
So picture this shifting, continuous landscape, right?
Hmm.
On one side, we have an intricate, glowing web of interconnected neural pathways. So the microscopic chemical biology of the human brain.
Okay, the hard science.
Right. And then on the other side, we have these vast historical and anthropological archives documenting human behavior across centuries. We're basically going to walk right down the middle of that terrain today.
Oh, that sounds amazing.
Yeah, we're looking at how our raw biological wiring intersects with human history to dictate how we love, who we desire, and why those two things are often wildly out of sync.
Okay, let's ground this in how Diamond actually began uncovering this, because the way she stumbled onto this realization is fascinating. We are in the early 1990s at Cornell University. Diamond is a young sexuality researcher, and she's specifically studying same-sex desire among young sexual minority women.
And that terminology, by the way, sexual minority, that is a very deliberate choice on her part.
How so? Like, why not just say lesbian or bisexual?
Because it was a vital methodological choice. The term sexual minority operates as a catch-all. It intentionally avoids rigid, culturally loaded acronyms or specific labels. By using this broader term, Diamond made absolutely no presumptions about how these women openly identified to the world or what political or social boxes they checked.
That makes sense. She didn't want to pigeonhole them before she even talked to them.
Exactly. She simply wanted to talk to individuals who experienced same-sex attractions, regardless of the label they wore. Her interest was in the raw, unfolding psychological process of how young women first begin to navigate and express these novel desires before society forces them to pick a permanent category.
Right, before the world tells them who they have to be. So she sets up the parameters for this foundational study. She recruits a group of young women aged 16 to 23 and conducts these intensive 90-minute interviews with each of them.
90 minutes is a long time for an interview. You get a lot of deep data.
You really do. They discuss their sexual feelings, their intimate relationships, how they view their evolving identities. And as she's analyzing the data from these exhaustive sessions, two completely unexpected anecdotes jump out at her.
The anomalies.
The anomalies. These weren't just outliers. They were stories that broke the foundational rules of what the scientific community thought they understood about human sexuality.
And, in any observational science, the anomalies are where you find the most profound breakthroughs.
Oh, for sure.
If you only ever look at the data that confirms your hypothesis, you never learn anything new. Diamond was willing to look really closely at the data that made absolutely no sense under the existing paradigms.
So let's look at the first major anomaly. It involves a participant we can call the roommate. So Diamond is interviewing this young woman who describes an incredibly intense relationship with her absolute best friend of over 5 years.
A very long time.
Right. They lived together as roommates. They spent their evenings cuddling on the couch, watching movies, talking for hours until the sun came up. They developed affectionate nicknames for each other. They held hands in public.
Wow.
I know. The participant literally told Diamond that it felt like a full-blown romantic relationship just without the sex.
Which points to a level of emotional intimacy that surpasses what we typically categorize as a standard platonic friendship. I mean, they were essentially functioning as a bonded couple in every emotional and psychological metric.
Exactly. And their other friends were constantly commenting on it, noting that they seemed closer than most married couples. But the two women never worried about it. They didn't question their orientations. They were just best friends.
Until they weren't.
Until they weren't. So one night, the dynamic shifts. They are lying in bed, cuddling, talking in the dark, and their faces are very close together. The participant is suddenly struck by an overwhelming, undeniable urge to kiss her friend.
Just out of nowhere.
Totally out of nowhere, they lock eyes. She senses her friend feels the exact same magnetic pull. She takes the risk, they kiss, and suddenly the physical boundary completely evaporates. They are stripping off their clothes, and that single moment sparks a passionate physical love affair that lasts for 2 years.
2 years.
Yeah. But the psychological aftermath for the participant was severe confusion. She told Diamond, let me quote this, "It was almost like the sexual feelings just spilled over from our emotional feelings. Am I a lesbian if I only feel this way about her?"
And that specific articulation right there, the idea of feelings spilling over, that is the crux of the scientific dilemma Diamond faced. This young woman had absolutely no preceding history of sexual attraction to women generally.
She wasn't walking down the street checking out other women.
Exactly. The sexual desire was entirely localized. It was entirely specific to this one profound emotional bond.
And just as Diamond is trying to process how that even works, she encounters the second anomaly, which is basically the mirror image of the first.
This self-identified lesbian.
Right. So we have this 20-year-old participant who confidently knew she was a lesbian from a very early age. She had enjoyed multiple, deeply satisfying romantic and sexual relationships with other women, but then she finds herself suddenly physically and sexually involved with her closest male friend.
Which completely inverts the variables of the first story while maintaining the exact same underlying mechanism.
They were hanging out one night, horsing around, cuddling on a bed, and the same thing happens. She suddenly wants to kiss him. They both realize they want to cross that physical line, and her confusion was just as profound as the first woman's. She told Diamond, "I know I'm still a lesbian, but it's like he's an exception because I love him so much."
To understand why these two stories were so baffling to a researcher in the early 90s, we really have to look at the prevailing scientific consensus of the era.
What were people thinking back then?
Well, at that time, the fields of psychology and biology operated under a very strict linear model of human attraction. The absolute belief was that sexual desire always, inevitably, preceded romantic love.
Like you have to want to sleep with them before you can love them.
Right. The established sequence was, you see someone, you experience a physical sexual attraction based on your inherent hardwired sexual orientation. And then, if the courtship goes well, you eventually develop the emotional bond of romantic love.
The spark has to come first, and then you build the fire around it.
Exactly. But these two young women were describing the exact opposite sequence. An intense, purely emotional, platonic bond was somehow generating entirely novel sexual desires out of thin air.
Yeah, the desire wasn't the initial spark at all. It was a byproduct, like a secondary reaction generated by the heat of the emotional fire.
That's a great way to put it.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because the spillover effect sounds remarkably like the physics of supercooling water.
Oh, I like this analogy.
Have you seen those videos online? You can take a bottle of incredibly pure water and drop the temperature well below freezing, but the water remarkably stays in a liquid state.
Right, because there's no impurities for the ice to form around.
Exactly. It defies what you think should happen because it lacks a nucleus to form ice crystals. It's only when you introduce a sudden physical catalyst, like sharply tapping the side of the bottle, or in the case of these women, a locked gaze or a moment of extreme, vulnerable physical closeness, that the entire bottle instantly crystallizes into solid ice.
Oh.
The potential for that state change was always there, suspended, but the extreme emotional bond was the tap on the glass that triggered the sudden transformation.
That is a highly accurate way to conceptualize the mechanism at play. The prolonged state of deep emotional intimacy lowered the threshold, and the physical closeness provided the catalyst for a sudden phase change from platonic to romantic and sexual.
It makes so much sense when you frame it like that.
It does. But Diamond faced a massive methodological hurdle here. She couldn't answer these women's profound questions about their shifting identities because her entire training was in sexuality research.
Right.
She was not a love researcher.
Which, by the way, highlights a strange blind spot in academia, that those two fields, sex and love, would be so siloed off from one another.
It is strange, yeah.
But it meant that to figure out why this bizarre spillover was happening, she first had to figure out what love actually is. Stripped of all the poetry and romance novels, she needed a clinical, scientific definition of love.
And she was incredibly fortunate to be at Cornell during this specific crisis in her research because Cornell happened to be the academic home of Dr. Cindy Hazan.
Okay, who is Cindy Hazan?
Hazan, along with her mentor Phil Shaver, was one of the world's leading experts on the science of adult romantic attachment.
Adult romantic attachment. Okay, we need to break down what Hazan and Shaver were actually working on because to understand adult love, the research actually takes us all the way back to infancy, right?
It does. It takes us to the foundational mid-century work of a psychoanalyst and psychiatrist named John Bowlby.
Right, Bowlby.
Bowlby fundamentally changed developmental psychology with his theory of attachment. Before Bowlby, a lot of psychologists thought infants just bonded with their mothers because their mothers provided food.
Just a transaction.
Yeah, exactly. But Bowlby argued that attachment isn't just a secondary conditioned response to being fed. It is a primal, fundamental human drive that evolved for one highly specific evolutionary purpose: to keep extremely vulnerable human infants in close physical proximity to their caregivers.
Because human babies are uniquely helpless in the animal kingdom. Like a human infant wandering off alone on the prehistoric savanna doesn't survive the night.
Not at all. The evolutionary pressure was immense. So evolution wired the human brain with this overwhelming attachment drive. And Bowlby categorized this system by three main behavioral hallmarks.
What are they?
First is proximity seeking, which is the infant reflexively reaching out, wanting to be held, wanting to be physically close to the mother. Second is comfort seeking, which is the instinct to run directly to the caregiver when frightened or stressed, using them as a safe haven.
Okay, and the third?
And third is separation distress, which is the panic, the wailing, and the crying that occurs when the caregiver is removed from the infant's sight.
Yeah, any parent listening knows exactly what separation distress sounds like.
Oh, absolutely. And Bowlby famously referred to this attachment system as a cradle-to-grave phenomenon.
Cradle to grave, meaning we don't just magically outgrow the need for that kind of profound, stabilizing emotional security the moment we turn 18 or graduate college.
No, we don't. We retain the biological hardware for it our entire lives.
Okay.
And this is where Hazan and Shaver made their monumental leap in the 1980s. They hypothesized that as we mature from children into independent adults, we don't discard the attachment system. Instead, we undergo a gradual psychological process where we transfer the role of the primary safety figure.
Transfer to who?
We transfer from our parents to our peers and eventually to a romantic partner.
Wow. So instead of running to mom when we have a terrible day, we run to our spouse or our long-term partner. We seek proximity to them. They become our safe haven.
Exactly.
And we absolutely feel separation distress when they are gone for extended periods.
Hazan and Shaver bolstered this theory by pointing out a very specific, undeniable set of behaviors that adults share only with romantic partners and with infants.
Think about the physical actions involved, right?
Yeah, extended chest-to-chest cuddling, prolonged mutual gazing directly into each other's eyes, long repetitive strokes of the entire body, and the use of private, affectionate language.
What we commonly call baby talk.
Right. You don't engage in those behaviors with your coworkers.
And I hope not.
No, you don't do them with casual acquaintances or even standard friends. You only perform those highly specific actions with babies and with romantic partners.
The baby talk phenomenon in adult relationships suddenly makes complete biological sense when you look at it through this lens. We aren't just being cute, we are actively activating ancient infant attachment protocols in our adult brains to solidify a bond.
We are pulling the levers of a deeply ingrained neurobiological system. And synthesizing this with Diamond's anomalous findings changes the entire picture. Diamond's subjects, the roommates, were experiencing full-blown adult romantic attachments with their supposedly platonic friends,
Because they were cohabitating, cuddling on the couch, creating affectionate nicknames.
and gazing into each other's eyes during deep conversations. They were inadvertently pulling all the heavy psychological levers of the adult attachment system. They were running the program without realizing it.
Oh, wait, I have to push back on this framework for a second. Hazan and Shaver argued that adult attachments integrate with the sexual system. That's supposed to be the defining difference between loving your mom and loving your husband, right? The sexual component.
Right, that's the standard model.
So if that's the case, aren't these intense, non-sexual, platonic friendships violating a biological rule? Shouldn't adult attachment actually require a sexual spark to even boot up the system? How can you form a romantic attachment without the romance part initiating it?
That is the exact logical pushback Diamond brought to Hazan's door. But the answer to that question reveals a crucial detail about the nature of infant attachment that completely reshapes how we view adult love.
I'm listening.
It answers why the sexual spark isn't necessary for the bond to form, and it takes us directly into the biology of the brain.
What is that crucial detail?
We have to look at the infant caregiver attachment system Bowlby described. It is fundamentally biologically a gender-blind system.
Wait, really?
Yes. Infants do not possess an innate preference for the gender of their caregiver. They don't preferentially bond only with women or only with men based on some internal setting. The singular, overriding driving force for an infant's attachment is simply the caregiver's responsiveness and availability.
So if the caregiver responds to the crying, provides warmth, and makes the infant feel secure, the infant attaches.
Precisely. The biological system doesn't screen for gender. It screens for safety.
But how does an infant's gender-blind safety screen translate to adults falling in love?
To understand that translation, we have to look closely at the neurochemical glue that holds both of these systems together, oxytocin.
Ah, oxytocin.
Yeah, oxytocin is a neuropeptide hormone. It's produced deep in the ancient emotional center of the brain, the hypothalamus, and it's released into the bloodstream and other brain areas from the posterior pituitary gland.
People often call it the cuddle hormone, which always sounds a bit reductive to me.
It is reductive because it does much more than just make us want to cuddle. It actively rewires neural pathways to create permanent bonds. To see how powerful it is, researchers look at animal models, specifically prairie voles.
Prairie voles.
Yeah. In most mammals, oxytocin mediates maternal behaviors, infant bonding, and kin recognition.
Yeah.
But uniquely, in prairie voles, which are one of the very few socially monogamous mammals on Earth, oxytocin also triggers adult pair bonding. And the primary trigger for the release of that oxytocin isn't necessarily sex. It's prolonged physical contact and proximity.
So the voles huddle together, oxytocin floods their neural reward centers, and they form a lifelong pair bond based on that physical and emotional security.
Exactly. And the foundational scientific takeaway here is that the neural circuits for infant caregiver attachment and the neural circuits for adult romantic pair bonding are exactly the same. They run on the exact same neurobiological hardware.
Wow.
Evolution didn't invent a second system for adult love. It just repurposed the infant system.
So if our brains are running these systems, it's like we have two completely separate smartphone apps. App A is attachment and love, and App B is sexual desire. Now, society has taught us our whole lives that these are the exact same app, or at least that they are completely hardwired together from birth.
Right, that they're inseparable.
But what the biology is showing us is that App A, the attachment app, doesn't even have a field in its code to input gender preference. The code simply doesn't exist. It just runs continuously on a responsiveness algorithm. It asks, does this person make me feel safe? Yes or no?
That analogy cuts right to the core of Diamond's realization. The implications of this are profound. Because the neural architecture is identical between infant and adult attachment, you literally cannot build gender preference into adult romantic attachment without also building it into infant attachment.
And since we know definitively that infants don't care about gender,
it means that the human capacity to fall in love is fundamentally biologically gender neutral. Anyone can fall in love with anyone, regardless of their underlying sexual orientation.
anyone can fall in love with anyone because the love machinery in the brain doesn't check a gender ID at the door. It only checks the does this person make me feel secure and seen ID.
Yes, our underlying sexual orientations might heavily direct who we want to sleep with, but they do not orient our romantic feelings.
Hmm.
The attachment system operates independently of the sexual orientation system.
But listen, if this is a hardwired biological truth, if this is evolutionary hardware that every human being possesses, then we shouldn't just be seeing it in a handful of 90s Cornell undergrads.
No, we shouldn't.
If this is how the brain works, we should see this happening everywhere, throughout all of recorded human history.
And we absolutely do. When we open the historical and anthropological archives and look across different cultures and eras, we find overwhelming, highly documented evidence of passionate, emotionally intense, functionally independent romantic friendships that cross all sorts of societal boundaries.
Okay, what do those historical examples actually look like? Because if this is a universal human trait, seeing how other cultures handled it might help us understand our own modern confusion.
It is remarkably universal, and it takes many forms. You can trace these intense, elevated bonds all the way back to ancient Greece, where certain philosophical friendships were revered above all other relationships. But let's look closer to home, at 19th century America.
Okay.
There were highly recognized, socially accepted relationships between women known as romantic friendships, which later evolved into what were called Boston marriages.
Boston marriages.
Yeah. Women would cohabitate, share their finances and their lives, and write incredibly passionate, poetic letters to one another. They exchanged vows of lifelong loyalty that mirrored marriage vows. In the emerging women's colleges of the era, young women formed intense, highly formalized attachments that were colloquially called smashes.
Wait, smashes. That sounds remarkably modern, like someone saying I have a massive smash on her.
It really does. And it was a widely recognized cultural phenomenon. Young women would send each other flowers, write poetry, and declare exclusive emotional devotion.
That's amazing.
And if we look globally, beyond Western history, we see incredibly similar structures. In Lesotho, a country in southern Africa, anthropologists have extensively documented mummy-baby relationships and Mosoli friendships among women.
What are those?
These are formalized, deeply emotional bonds that exist alongside traditional heterosexual marriages. We also see camaraderie and Bagburu relationships documented in other distinct cultures, serving the exact same emotional purpose.
But is this predominantly a female phenomenon? Because society often stereotypes women as being more emotionally fluid or permissive with affection. Does this happen with men, or is male biology somehow different in this regard?
It absolutely happens with men, which effectively shatters that stereotype. Western explorers and anthropologists extensively documented incredibly powerful, passionate friendships between Native American men that mirrored the emotional intensity and lifelong commitment of romantic love.
Wow, okay.
Furthermore, anthropologists have documented deeply passionate male-male friendships in Cameroon, in Melanesia, in Samoa, Polynesia, and Guatemala. In many of these cultures, these bonds involved extreme affection, public declarations of devotion, and shared life goals that, to a Western observer, looked identical to the passion of heterosexual lovers.
So people have been doing this forever, forming these life-altering emotional bonds, regardless of gender, completely independently of whatever sexual expectations their society placed on them.
Yes, but what's truly revealing here is the modern academic reaction to these historical records.
Oh, so this ought to be good.
Modern historians and anthropologists often look back at these relationships, like the Boston marriages or the college smashes, and they cynically assume, oh, they were obviously secretly sexual. They were actually just lesbians or gay men who were repressed by their puritanical society and couldn't express their true physical desires.
Because modern society just can't imagine two people writing poetry to each other, living together, and vowing lifelong loyalty without them also hooking up. We assume sex is the mandatory center of the universe.
That assumption reveals our own incredibly rigid modern cultural bias. We literally cannot fathom profound romantic passion existing independently of a sexual component. We take our modern cultural boxes, where love and sex are perfectly, inextricably equated, and we forcefully retrofit historical figures into them.
Right.
By insisting that these relationships must have been sexual to be valid, we actually rob these historical figures of the nuance of their actual lived experience. We erase the reality of pure romantic friendship.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because we tend to think of our modern era as so highly enlightened, We have all this terminology, all these specific labels, flags, and categories for every conceivable type of attraction. But maybe our absolute obsession with linking love and sex directly together has actually blinded us to a much broader, much more complex human experience.
It absolutely has.
In our rush to label everything with a sexual identity, we've lost the ability to just let a passionate, emotional friendship be exactly what it is.
And that historical blindness, that reflexive assumption that love must equal sex, is exactly why Diamond realized she couldn't rely on the old frameworks to help the women in her study. She had to propose an entirely new scientific model for how love and desire actually operate in the human brain.
So she builds this new model, and according to the source material, she rests it on three distinct pillars. How does this new framework actually solve the mystery of the spillover effect?
The first pillar of Diamond's model is the foundational realization we've been circling. The biological processes underlying romantic love and the processes underlying sexual desire are functionally independent. There are two different systems in the brain with different evolutionary origins.
Okay, that's pillar one.
Right. You can experience intense sexual desire without a drop of love, and conversely, you can experience profound, life-altering love without a drop of sexual desire.
The two separate apps on the smartphone, they can run independently in the background.
Exactly. The second pillar builds directly on Bowlby and Herzon's work. Adult attachment, what we experience as romantic love, is fundamentally gender-neutral. Your underlying sexual orientation does not dictate or limit who you are capable of falling in love with. The attachment system is blind to gender. It only sees emotional responsiveness and security.
And then there's the third pillar. And this one seems to be the linchpin that explains how everything gets so complicated.
It is the most complex and historically the most controversial, but it's the absolute key to understanding sexual fluidity. The third pillar states that the biobehavioral links between the love system and the desire system are bidirectional.
Bidirectional, meaning they aren't just isolated islands, they can talk to each other and actively influence each other in both directions.
Sufficely. In modern culture, we are very comfortable with one direction. Sexual desire leading to romantic love. You feel a spark, you sleep with someone, the intimacy grows, and eventually you bond and fall in love.
Classic narrative.
But Diamond argued that the oxytocin pathways in the brain prove it can work in reverse. Remember, oxytocin spikes to its absolute highest circulating levels in humans during sexual activity. It's deeply implicated in the physiological experience of orgasm and that warm, bonded feeling of satiety afterward.
So the act of sex releases a flood of oxytocin, which effectively builds the emotional bond of love over time.
Yes. But if sex can release oxytocin to create love, then oxytocin released purely through emotional bonding, like the roommates cuddling on the couch, talking all night, can act as a chemical bridge to trigger the sexual system.
Wait, so the brain just bridges the gap?
Yeah. Animal studies back this up beautifully. If researchers administer exogenous oxytocin, meaning they artificially inject oxytocin into an animal, it actually stimulates females to actively seek out sexual activity.
So the intense emotional bond creates a massive sustained flood of oxytocin. And that oxytocin literally knocks on the door of the sexual desire system and says, hey, wake up, we're doing this now. The love actually creates the desire.
The oxytocin from the intense emotional bond kicks the sexual desire system into gear, but specifically and exclusively for that one person who triggered the oxytocin release.
Ah, okay.
This explains how a fiercely heterosexual woman can suddenly experience overwhelming desire for her female best friend, or how a gay man can suddenly desire his female friend. The love built a chemical bridge for the desire to cross.
And this ties into a fascinating psychological concept mentioned in the text, the open gender schema. How does that play into this bidirectional link?
The concept of the open gender schema came out of vital research conducted in San Francisco in the 90s, led by Weinberg and his colleagues. They interviewed individuals who described their attraction as being to the person rather than to the gender. These individuals essentially had developed an open gender schema. They had successfully disconnected the rigid cue of gender from their sexual desire triggers. This cognitive flexibility allowed them to respond purely to the specific traits, the personality, the humor, and the emotional resonance of the individual in front of them, allowing the oxytocin bridge to form much more easily.
What stands out to you here? Because for me, it's the sheer undeniable power of oxytocin. The idea that a single hormone, evolved to keep infants close to their mothers, acts as a literal bridge between two separate islands in the adult brain, the island of love and the island of sex. It's like biology is constantly finding loopholes in the rigid rules we try to set for ourselves.
It is a remarkable loophole that ensures human connection above all else.
But this raises a really critical question, and it's the obvious counterargument to all of this. If love is truly gender neutral, and if our sexual desires can magically shift based on who we happen to fall in love with through this oxytocin bridge, does sexual orientation even mean anything anymore? Is everyone just secretly bisexual and pretending we're not?
It's a very common reaction to this research, to assume that fluidity erases orientation. But the science provides a very clear, highly nuanced answer. Yes, sexual orientation is a very real, incredibly meaningful biological phenomenon. It absolutely exists.
That's a relief, because otherwise a lot of people's profound lived experiences are suddenly invalidated. What is the actual proof that orientation is a fixed biological reality?
The most compelling evidence comes from behavioral genetics, specifically large-scale twin studies. Researchers look at monozygotic identical twins who share 100% of their DNA and dizygotic fraternal twins who share 50%.
Right, classic twin studies.
By comparing the rates at which both twins share the same sexual orientation, researchers can calculate the genetic impact. These studies have consistently shown that the heritability of sexual orientation is somewhere between 30 and 40%.
What does a 30 to 40% heritability rate actually mean in terms of how a person experiences their life?
It means that sexual orientation is significantly, undeniably influenced by our genetics. We are born with hardwired predispositions to experience sexual attraction to one gender, the other, or both. There's a biological baseline.
Okay.
However, because the heritability is not 100%, it means it is not completely, rigidly determined by raw DNA sequence alone. There is a significant portion left unaccounted for, which leaves room for epigenetic factors, hormonal exposure in utero, and developmental or social factors to play a role in how that baseline is expressed.
So if sexual orientation is a real biological baseline predisposition, then what exactly is sexual fluidity? Because people often use those terms interchangeably in casual conversation, like fluidity is just a new type of orientation you can select from a drop-down menu.
That's a crucial distinction to make. Sexual fluidity is not a sexual orientation itself. You don't identify as sexually fluid the way you identify as gay or straight or bisexual. Fluidity is simply the capacity for your desires to change based on different situations, environments, and specific interpersonal relationships.
Yeah.
Orientation is your baseline. Fluidity is your capacity to adapt when specific emotional triggers like a profound attachment occur.
So orientation is like being naturally right-handed. It's a real biological predisposition. You are born with it. If someone throws a ball at you unexpectedly, you will instinctively reach up and catch it with your right hand. You will always naturally reach for a pen with your right hand. It is your dominant, hardwired baseline.
That establishes the biological reality of orientation perfectly.
But fluidity means that if you break your right arm, or if you are put into a highly specific, intense situation where you have to adapt, your brain's neuroplasticity is actually flexible enough to learn how to write beautifully with your left hand. It might take a specific environment to trigger it, but you have the inherent capacity.
Yes.
And here's the absolute key. Using your left hand to write for a year doesn't mean you were somehow wrong about being right-handed your whole life. It doesn't invalidate your baseline. It just means you are a highly adaptable human being capable of responding to your environment.
That analogy captures the dynamic brilliantly. Your orientation remains your dominant, everyday predisposition, but your inherent fluidity allows for adaptation outside that baseline under specific, usually emotionally intense conditions.
Which makes total sense.
And interestingly, when researchers look at lifetime data, bisexual patterns of attraction where people experience attraction to multiple genders over the course of their lifespan are actually more common than exclusive, rigid patterns of same-sex attraction. Fluidity, the capacity to adapt, is much more the norm in human biology than the exception.
While the science of adaptability is fascinating, as we discuss how flexible the human brain can be, we have to acknowledge how easily this information could be twisted. If you tell certain people that human sexuality has this adaptable, fluid component, they might try to weaponize that fact.
And historically, they tragically have done exactly that. This brings us to a very dark, deeply unethical application of misunderstood science: the history of reparative therapy, often referred to as conversion therapy.
Because the flawed logic is obvious. If someone believes that sexual orientation can shift under certain conditions due to fluidity, they might conclude, great, let's just force it to shift in the direction society approves of. Let's take same-sex attracted individuals and theoretically cure them by forcing their fluidity toward heterosexuality.
That has been the justification used by numerous individuals and groups. They have looked at the reality of sexual fluidity and mistakenly used it as a scientific shield to attempt to eliminate same-sex attractions through therapeutic interventions.
It's awful.
But the science, absolutely, unequivocally, does not support this. The source material highlights the definitive findings of the 2009 American Psychological Association, the APA Task Force, which was convened specifically to examine the data on these practices.
What did the APA Task Force actually find when they looked purely at the data?
Impartially analyzing decades of clinical data, the APA found absolutely no conclusive evidence that same-sex attractions can be deliberately eliminated or changed through therapy. The goal of shifting someone's baseline orientation is scientifically impossible.
Completely impossible.
In fact, they found the exact opposite of a cure. These efforts consistently produced lasting, severe psychological harm. The cognitive dissonance and minority stress induced by trying to change a biological baseline provoked significantly higher rates of clinical depression, severe anxiety, and suicidality among those who were subjected to these interventions.
It doesn't work, and the attempt actively damages the psychological architecture of the person. But looking at this through Diamond's model, why does it fail so spectacularly? If fluidity is a real mechanism in the brain, why can't we consciously steer it?
Because of the fundamental nature of how fluidity operates biologically.
Yeah.
According to Diamond's research, sexual fluidity represents a broadening of attractions over time and across different situations. It is an expansion of capacity, a widening of the emotional and sexual aperture.
Okay, so it opens up.
Right. Reparative therapy attempts to do the exact opposite. It attempts to force a narrowing of attraction. It tries to shut down existing neural pathways. You cannot biologically compress an expanding system.
You can't force the water back into the tap once the glass is overflowing. The system only moves outward.
Furthermore, when you look at the qualitative data from the women in Diamond studies who actually experienced these fluid shifts in desire, the universal commonality is that these changes were entirely unexpected and utterly uncontrollable.
The roommate didn't wake up one Tuesday, look at her calendar, and say, I think I'll consciously choose to be sexually attracted to my best friend today. It happened to her. It was an event she experienced, not a choice she made.
This highlights a crucial boundary of human neurobiology. You cannot effortfully push your sexual feelings in a certain direction through sheer willpower, behavioral conditioning, or therapeutic intervention.
You just can't.
Just as you cannot force yourself to genuinely fall in love with someone on command, no matter how good they look on paper or how much sense it makes socially, you cannot force your sexual fluidity to conform to a societal standard. It operates entirely subconsciously. It is driven by authentic emotional bonds, sudden neurochemical cascades, and the ancient attachment system, not by conscious choice or societal pressure.
So what does this all mean? It means that fluidity is not a dial on a dashboard that you can manually tune to make your life easier or to fit into a neater box. It's more like an unconscious weather system. Most of the time, the climate is highly predictable based on your baseline orientation. You know what to wear, you know what to expect.
I love that.
But occasionally, an intense emotional low-pressure system rolls in a profound attachment to someone unexpected, and the weather completely changes the landscape of your life. And you don't control the weather, you just have to marvel at the storm and adapt to it.
That captures the uncontrollability perfectly. And this lack of conscious control over our deepest emotional and biological systems brings us right back to one of the most relatable, universal human experiences, an experience that has baffled people for centuries.
Let me guess. It explains why we consistently make absolutely terrible decisions in our love lives.
Precisely. It explains the biological mechanism behind why we fall for the wrong person.
Everyone listening has either been there or is currently holding their breath because they are living through it right now. Why does our highly evolved logical brain let us do this?
To understand the mechanism, we have to return to Bowlby's theory of attachment one last time. Remember, Bowlby argued that the attachment system was designed by evolution to supersede all other powerful drives in cases of danger or distress.
Right?
If an infant is scared or threatened, the drive to seek solace in the caregiver's arms is stronger than the drive for hunger, stronger than the drive for thirst.
The need for emotional security physically overrides the need for basic sustenance. That shows how powerful the circuitry is.
Our brains are literally hardwired at the deepest limbic level to prioritize basic needs for love, bonding, and emotional security far above cold, calculated logic or societal expectations.
So when we apply this to everyday adult life, this is the exact scientific explanation for why people fall madly, deeply in love with individuals who are entirely wrong for them. I'm talking about people with totally incompatible personalities, or people who are emotionally unavailable, or people in completely different stages of life, or tragically, people who are already married to someone else.
In those situations, the logical part of your brain, your prefrontal cortex, is assessing the data and waving massive red flags. It is screaming, "This is a terrible idea. This person will ruin your life, complicate your friendships, and break your heart."
But the attachment drive, fueled by that ancient primal need for connection and security, just barrels right through those logical red flags like a freight train. It bypasses the prefrontal cortex
It
entirely.
completely ignores it.
It even barrels right through an individual's established sexual orientation, as Diamond's research proved. The attachment system just grabs the wheel, floods the brain with oxytocin, and screams, "I don't care if this person is wrong for you, this is the one."
This is the one who makes me feel secure, seen, and connected in this exact moment, and nothing else matters.
The biological imperative to bond overrules the logical imperative to be safe. And this leads to Diamond's ultimate, final thesis in the chapter. The true hallmark of human love and mating is not rigidity. It is not staying in perfect, predictable, easily categorized boxes.
What is it then?
The fundamental hallmark of human love is flexibility and adaptability.
Which is such a deeply freeing perspective. If you or a friend are agonizing over a relationship, asking, "Why do I keep falling for the wrong person? Why can't I just be attracted to the nice, safe, logical option?" The science is offering a massive wave of relief right now. The science says, do not blame yourself. You are fundamentally, evolutionarily wired to bond, and that survival system will occasionally completely hijack the rest of your brain. We've vastly overstayed our own role and conscious control in these incredibly important emotional arenas. We think we are the rational captains of the ship, but really, the ancient attachment system is the ocean current carrying us along.
That's a beautiful way to think about it.
And importantly, any single love relationship or any single unexpected instance of sexual desire doesn't necessarily predict your entire future. A fluid shift in your desires today doesn't rewrite your whole tomorrow. It just means your incredibly complex brain adapted to the present moment to secure a profound human connection.
This has been an absolutely phenomenal exploration of how our minds actually work. Let's synthesize what we've discovered in this deep dive. We started by dismantling the assumption that romantic love and sexual desire are the exact same thing. We end knowing that they are running on completely separate tracks in the brain, but they are intricately linked by a bidirectional bridge of oxytocin. We learned that adult romantic love isn't dictated by gender. It's a gender-blind attachment system borrowed directly from our infancy, running on the fuel of emotional responsiveness. And finally, we learned that human sexual fluidity is not a crisis of identity, and it's certainly nothing that can or should be cured. It is a biological testament to our capacity to adapt.
It really is a profound testament to the resilience and complexity of human nature. And I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over, building on everything we've discussed today about the history and biology of love.
Go for it.
If our deepest, most primal capacity for love and attachment is fundamentally a gender-blind survival mechanism designed to adapt to whoever makes us feel secure, how much unnecessary anxiety are we causing ourselves by trying to perfectly align our lifelong emotional needs with rigid, static labels? What would your relationships look like if you stopped trying to categorize your feelings and simply allowed yourself to experience them?
Wow, that is the exact question to take with you today. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Keep asking questions, stay curious, and keep seeking out those hidden nuggets of knowledge.